Why would Marilyn Monroe, a star so luminous she could bend the will of studio empires, agree to film a script that held up a magnifying glass to every one of her scars? Why would she willingly step onto a sun-scorched desert, set to perform her own private anguish for the entire world to see? The official story tells us it was a work of art, a final, brilliant collaboration between two great American talents. That is a comforting lie. The truth is, the screenplay for the Misfits was not a gift. It was a verdict, delivered by the one man who had cataloged every single one of her secrets: her husband, Arthur Miller. The world was enchanted by the union. It was a storybook cliché spun into reality, the greatest playwright of his generation, and the most desired woman on the planet. Beauty and the brains. The press sold it as a fairy tale, a meeting of intellectual gravity and ethereal glamour. For a time, perhaps they believed it themselves. Marilyn saw in Miller a refuge, a mind that could finally see past the platinum blonde artifice and value the poet hiding within. She yearned for his intellectual validation, a stamp of approval from a world that had only ever praised her body. Miller, in turn, was drawn to her incandescence, the raw, untamed life force that seemed to burn away the stale cynicism of his world. She moved to the East Coast, embracing a quieter life, auditing classes, and trying to mold herself into the woman she thought he wanted. She believed this intellectual giant would be her savior, the anchor for her turbulent soul. But the shadows in a mind as formidable as Miller's run long and deep. He wasn't saving her. He was studying her. He filled notebooks with observations, not as a lover, but as a dramatist, clinically dissecting her anxieties, her fears of inadequacy, her desperate, childlike need for love. He saw the cracks in the goddess, the trembling girl beneath the icon, and he started taking notes. The fairy tale began to curdle. The intellectual she adored began to treat her like a beautiful, but broken, specimen. His praise was often tinged with condescension, his affection conditional. The anchor she so desperately craved felt more and more like a cage, one constructed of his quiet judgment and academic superiority. And then, in England, during the filming of The Prince and the Showgirl in 1956, Marilyn found the evidence. She found his journal. The man she worshipped had written that she was a pitiful, directionless child, that he was disappointed in her, even ashamed of her. He wrote that his first wife, Mary, was better for him. The words were a scalpel to her soul. The discovery didn't just break her heart. It shattered the very foundation of her reality. The one man she believed saw her true self, in fact, saw only a pathetic creature he regretted tethering himself to. This was the moment their love story died. What was left was something far more dangerous: a playwright with a subject, and a subject with no escape. This is where our story truly begins. Not in the glittering lights of Hollywood, but in the brutal, unforgiving glare of the Nevada desert. It was here, years after the poison of that journal entry had taken root, that Arthur Miller would write his masterpiece. Not the play that would win him another Pulitzer, but the screenplay that would serve as the most elegant and brutal character assassination in cinematic history. He called it The Misfits, and he presented it to Marilyn as a gift. A valentine, he said. A chance for her to finally show the world the serious actress she was. A gift. It was a Trojan horse. Inside its pages was not a celebration of her talent, but a meticulous vivisection of her pain. The character he created for her, Rosalind Tabor, was not a character at all. She was a carbon copy of the broken woman Miller saw when he looked at his wife. Every insecurity Marilyn had whispered to him in the dead of night, every childhood trauma she had confessed in their most intimate moments, every single one of her private fears, he had harvested them all and woven them into Rosalind's dialogue. Her sensitivity to suffering, her feeling of being used by men, her profound loneliness, her desperate plea to be seen as more than just a beautiful body. It was all there, laid bare on the page. He was forcing her to perform her own breakdown, to put her own shattered psyche on display for the entertainment of millions. He knew she couldn't refuse. Her career was stalling, and her deep-seated belief in his genius, even a tarnished version of it, meant she trusted his words on the page more than her own instincts. She saw the pain in the script, but she believed it was a path to artistic truth, a way to finally exorcise her demons. She didn't realize she wasn't exorcising them. She was immortalizing them. The production was doomed from the start, a slow-motion catastrophe unfolding under the 110-degree Nevada sun. The location itself was a metaphor, a place of last chances, populated by gamblers and divorcees, a final stop before oblivion. The cast was a collection of titans, all of them running from something. Clark Gable, the aging king of Hollywood, facing his own mortality. Montgomery Clift, a man physically and emotionally shattered by a near-fatal car crash years earlier, his beautiful face a tragic mask. And at the center of it all was Marilyn, becoming more fragile by the day. She was trapped in a failing marriage, trapped in a role that was a mirror of her own agony, and trapped by her dependency on pills, barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake up. Her doctors, flown in by the studio, kept the prescriptions flowing, a chemical solution to a spiritual crisis. Her chronic lateness to the set became legendary, infuriating the cast and crew. Director John Huston, a man who famously gambled away the studio's money at the nearby casinos each night, grew increasingly frustrated. The world saw an unprofessional, unstable diva wrecking a multi-million-dollar production. But they didn't see the full picture. They didn't see the script pages that would arrive under her door each morning. While Marilyn was being publicly condemned for her instability, Arthur Miller was in his hotel room, rewriting scenes. He wasn't simplifying them to accommodate her fragile state. He was making them more difficult, more painful, more psychologically invasive. Night after night, he would listen to her tortured, pill-induced confessions, and by morning he would have spun her private hell into public dialogue. He wasn't her husband, her protector. He was her ghostwriter. Consider the scene where Rosalind has a frantic, desperate breakdown in the desert, screaming at the men who are wrangling the wild mustangs. "You're all liars, all of you. You're only happy when you can see something die. Why don't you kill yourselves and be happy?" That wasn't just acting. That was the primal scream of a woman who felt her own life force being captured, branded, and broken for sport. Miller hadn't just written a scene. He had engineered a moment for his wife to completely unravel on camera, and he gave her the exact words to do it. He was using the film to tell his side of their story, to paint her as this beautifully tragic, but ultimately impossible, creature. He was crafting his own narrative of their marriage, casting himself as the long-suffering intellectual who simply couldn't tame this wild, beautiful thing. The script absolved him of all responsibility. It wasn't his coldness or his judgment that broke her. It was her own inherent tragic flaw. The film was his alibi, written in ink and celluloid. And while he was meticulously documenting his wife's disintegration on set during the day, he was committing the final, ultimate betrayal behind her back. Her name was Ing Morath, a Magnum photographer assigned to document the making of the film. She was everything Marilyn wasn't: European, intellectual, self-possessed, and emotionally contained. She was an artist in her own right, a woman who could meet Miller on his own terms. While Marilyn was being forced to relive every ounce of her trauma for the cameras, her husband was falling in love with another woman, just a few feet away. He was building his future while actively dismantling her present. The whispers on set became impossible to ignore. Marilyn knew. Everyone knew. The emotional torment was now layered with the raw, humiliating pain of infidelity. The set became a pressure cooker. Marilyn's health collapsed completely. The combination of the pills, the punishing heat, and the psychological warfare being waged against her by her own husband was too much. Production was shut down as she was flown to a hospital in Los Angeles for what the studio publicity machine called acute exhaustion. It was a complete nervous breakdown. She had been pushed past the brink, her body and mind finally surrendering to the relentless assault. Miller's response was not that of a worried husband. It was that of an inconvenienced producer. His magnum opus was on hold. During this hiatus, he could have shown mercy. He could have rewritten the rest of the script to give Rosalind, and by extension Marilyn, a moment of grace, a path to genuine freedom. He did the opposite. While she was lying in a hospital bed, he refined his final verdict. He wrote an ending that offered no escape. In the film's conclusion, Rosalind doesn't leave the destructive men behind. She doesn't find her own strength. Instead, she drives off into the darkness with Gable's character, Gay Langland, another broken man, another cowboy who can't change. She simply trades one form of dependency for another. Miller's final lines for her are chillingly prophetic. As they drive off, she looks at the stars and asks, "How do you find your way back in the dark?" Gay replies, "Just head for that big star straight on. The highway's under it. It'll take us right home." It sounds hopeful, but it's a lie. There is no home. There is only the next highway, the next man, the next empty promise. Miller had written her a life sentence. When Marilyn finally returned to the set, she was a ghost of her former self. The crew and cast saw the change. The spark was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out resignation. She was there to finish the job, to see her own character assassination through to the end. John Huston would later recall that she wasn't really there, that she was somewhere else, performing on pure instinct. The final scenes were completed in a haze of sorrow and medication. The movie that was supposed to be her great triumph had become her public execution. The marriage was over the moment the director yelled, "Cut!" for the last time. The divorce papers were filed in Mexico in January of 1961. A few weeks later, the Misfits premiered. Marilyn, now legally and emotionally severed from Arthur Miller, had to sit in a dark theater and watch the final cut. She had to watch herself, not as an actress playing a part, but as a soul dissected on a slab. Every flaw, every fear, every desperate hope projected 10 feet high for the world to judge. She wasn't watching a movie. She was watching her own autopsy. She wasn't watching a movie. She was watching her own autopsy. And what happens when the autopsy is over? What happens when the ghost has to get up off the slab, walk out of the theater, and somehow pretend to be alive? For Marilyn Monroe, the hell she had just endured was not the end. It was a prelude to a far more terrifying, far more intimate form of imprisonment. And this time, the architect of her torment wasn't a husband. It was the one person she had trusted to put the pieces back together, her own psychiatrist. In February of 1961, just weeks after her divorce from Miller, Marilyn voluntarily checked into a New York hospital at the suggestion of her psychoanalyst, Marianne Criss. She believed she was going for a rest cure, a quiet place to detox from the sleeping pills and the emotional wreckage of the last year. But Criss had lied. Marilyn was not checked into a hospital for rest. She was committed to the psychiatric ward. There was no therapy. There was no rest. There was a padded cell. The windows were barred, covered in heavy mesh. Her clothes were taken away. Her rights were stripped. She was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner. The woman who had just been the world's biggest movie star, whose face was a global emblem of freedom and desire, was now locked in a 6-by-9-foot room, her every move watched, her every plea for help dismissed as the ravings of a hysterical female. How do you prove you're sane when the very act of protesting your insanity is taken as proof of your madness? This was the ultimate gaslighting. Arthur Miller had used words to twist her reality on a film set. Criss was now using the full weight of the medical establishment to invalidate her existence entirely. They had told her she was sick, and when she finally sought help, the help itself became the punishment. But Marilyn was not broken. Not yet. Trapped in that cell, she found her sharpest weapon: her words. She managed to get a pencil and paper, and she wrote a desperate, furious, and brilliantly lucid 6-page letter to her acting coach, Ralph Roberts. This letter is not the writing of a madwoman. It is the testimony of a hostage. She wrote, "There was no empathy at Payne Whitney. It had a very bad effect. They put me in a cell for disturbed, depressed patients. I felt I was in a prison for a crime I hadn't committed." She described the barbaric methods, the lack of compassion, the sheer terror of being utterly powerless. She detailed how she methodically planned an escape, not through hysterics, but through intelligence. She recalled a scene from a movie. In it, a character breaks a window to get attention. So Marilyn found a chair, smashed the small glass pane in her door, and held a shard of glass to her own wrist. Not to harm herself, but to be heard. She wrote, "I said to them, if you are going to treat me like a nut, I'll act like a nut." It was a calculated performance, using the very image they had of her as a weapon against them. It was the ultimate act of defiance. But nobody was listening. The staff saw it as just another breakdown. Her doctors, her so-called protectors, had abandoned her. The intellectual, artistic world she had so desperately wanted to belong to, the world of Arthur Miller, had chewed her up and now locked her away. So, who could she call? Who in her life had ever seen her not as a commodity, a patient, or a muse, but simply as a person in trouble? She had one last call to make, to a man from a completely different world, a world of grass stains, leather gloves, and uncomplicated loyalty. She called Joe DiMaggio, her second husband, the man she had divorced years earlier because his quiet world couldn't contain her supernova ambition. He wasn't in New York. He was in Florida. But when he got the call, when he heard the terror in her voice, he didn't analyze it. He didn't write a poem about it. He acted. He flew to New York immediately. He marched into the Payne Whitney Clinic, this temple of psychiatric authority. And he was not quiet. He was not polite. Eyewitness accounts say he was a storm of controlled fury. He told the administration, in no uncertain terms, "Release my wife, or I swear I will take this building apart brick by brick." They had never seen anything like it. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an extraction. And just like that, they released her. The doctors and administrators who had held absolute power over Marilyn Monroe buckled before the sheer, unwavering force of a man who simply refused to play their game. The great intellectual Arthur Miller had used her pain to write his masterpiece. The great psychoanalyst Marianne Criss had used her pain to justify an imprisonment. And the simple ballplayer, Joe DiMaggio, used his strength to set her free. He didn't ask what was wrong with her. He just knew she didn't belong in a cage. The experience left a scar deeper than any divorce. Marilyn was free, but she was also profoundly changed. The world now seemed divided. There were those who saw her as a problem to be solved, and those who saw her as a person to be protected. The trust she had placed in intellectuals, in artists, in doctors, was shattered. So where did she turn next? If the worlds of art and medicine had betrayed her, she would seek protection from a different kind of power. The ultimate power. This is where the story of Marilyn Monroe, the fragile victim, ends, and a new, far more dangerous story begins. A story of secrets, power, and politics at the highest level. Because in the aftermath of her release, terrified and isolated, Marilyn sought comfort in a new circle of friends. A very powerful, very ambitious, and very charismatic family. The Kennedys. The popular narrative paints her relationship with President John F. Kennedy, and later his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, as a simple, sordid affair. The movie star and the politicians. But was it that simple? Was this woman, who had just survived the psychological warfare of Arthur Miller and the institutional cruelty of Payne Whitney, really just a starstruck mistress? Or was something else going on? Consider the context. By 1962, Marilyn was more perceptive than ever. She had learned the hard way about men who used her for their own narratives. She was also under constant surveillance. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, was watching her. The mafia, a target of Robert Kennedy's fierce crusades, was watching her. And she, in turn, was watching them. She was a guest in their homes. She was a confidant on their late-night phone calls. Friends and insiders spoke of her little red book, a diary, where she meticulously wrote down everything she heard. And what was she hearing? This wasn't just celebrity gossip. This was the height of the Cold War. She was on the periphery of conversations about Cuba, about the mafia, about the tangled and dirty secrets that held Washington, D.C. together. Peter Lawford, the Kennedy brother-in-law who first introduced them, would later state in a terrified interview that Marilyn knew too much, that she knew things that could bring down the government. Was she a pawn, a player, or something in between? Think about it. The Kennedys represented a new kind of power. Charismatic, intellectual, but also ruthless. For a woman who had just been brutalized by one kind of intellectual man, Arthur Miller, was she perhaps drawn to another, more powerful version? Did she see in Jack and Bobby Kennedy a strength that could finally keep her safe, only to find herself caught in a game with far higher stakes than any movie? The phone calls started to become more frantic. Her friends noticed a new kind of fear in her. Not the old anxiety, but a sharp, specific paranoia. She believed her house was bugged. She was right. The FBI had placed wiretaps. She told friends that she had secrets, important secrets, that she might one day have to reveal to protect herself. The relationships, which had begun as a glamorous escape, were curdling into a threat. She had been passed from the Hollywood studio system that owned her body, to an intellectual husband who tried to own her mind, to a medical system that tried to own her sanity. And now, was she entangled with a political dynasty that saw her as just another secret to be managed, a liability to be contained? The affair with President Kennedy allegedly cooled, and her attachment shifted to his brother, Bobby. The calls to the Justice Department became more and more frequent. But what were they about? Passionate pleas from a jilted lover? Or something more? Was she a woman threatening to expose state secrets she had overheard in moments of intimacy? Was the line between the personal and the political beginning to blur, creating a situation that was becoming dangerously unstable for everyone involved? The narrative of Marilyn Monroe as a fragile doll, broken by love affairs, is a convenient one. It's the story Arthur Miller wanted to tell. It's the story that papers her over and makes her safe. But what if the truth is more complicated? What if the astute, intelligent woman who wrote that defiant letter from a padded cell didn't just stumble into the Kennedy orbit? What if she understood the power dynamics perfectly and was trying to leverage them for her own survival? She had survived Hollywood. She had survived Arthur Miller. She had survived Payne Whitney. Each time, she had emerged wounded but smarter, with a deeper understanding of the men who sought to control her. But the game she was playing in 1962 was different. The opponents were more powerful, the secrets were darker, and the stakes weren't just about a career or a marriage. They were about life and death. The most dangerous men in the world now knew her name, and more importantly, they were beginning to wonder what, exactly, she knew about them. And what did they fear she knew? The answer is far more explosive than any clandestine love affair, because it goes to the very heart of how power in America truly operated. Because there was another dangerous man in her life, a figure who connected the glamour of Hollywood, the power of Washington, and the shadowy underworld of organized crime. Frank Sinatra. He was Marilyn's friend, but he was also the bridge between the Kennedys and the Chicago mob boss, Sam Giancana. In the final, frantic weekend of her life, Marilyn wasn't in Hollywood. She was at Sinatra's Cal Neva Lodge, a notorious mob stronghold. Was she there to perform? Or was she there to deliver a message? Or perhaps to be given one? Think about the trap she was in. Was she being used by the mob to gather dirt on the Kennedys, who had double-crossed them? Or was she simply bait, a beautiful, fragile distraction in a deadly game between the government and the mafia? The men she thought were her protectors may have been the ones leading her straight into the fire. That final weekend at Cal Neva was an endgame, a place where the intersecting lines of power, Washington, the mob, Hollywood, finally converged on her. She returned to her Brentwood home, not renewed, but cornered. The last 24 hours of her life are a vortex of conflicting reports, a chaotic symphony of mysterious visitors, panicked phone calls, and a silence that fell with unnerving speed. The official story, the one that was cemented within hours, tells of a lonely woman succumbing to her demons, a probable suicide. It's a neat, tidy ending, but it ignores too much. It ignores the housekeeper being mysteriously sent away. It ignores the phone records that were scrubbed clean. And it ignores the most crucial missing piece of evidence, the little red diary, the book that friends said never left her side. It vanished that night, along with the truth. Was it suicide? Or was she a woman who, in a final, desperate act of self-preservation, threatened to hold a press conference? A woman who was about to turn the secrets she had collected into a weapon, aimed at the most powerful men in the country. Was she silenced before she could speak? The answer died with her in that room, the truth managed and contained by the very forces she had tried to navigate. They needed her to be a tragedy, a beautiful, broken thing, because the alternative is too terrifying. The alternative suggests that a woman, armed with nothing but her intelligence and proximity to power, could become a threat to national security. Not because she was a spy, but because she saw the men who ran the world with their masks off, and she remembered what she saw. Marilyn Monroe was not a fragile doll. She was the lone queen on a board full of kings and knights, who changed the rules of the game when they started to lose. Her death was not an ending. It was a redaction, a black line drawn through a history we were never meant to read. She was passed between systems of control her entire life, but in the end, she may have been erased by the most powerful system of all. Her story is not just about the life and death of a movie star. It is a ghost story that haunts the American political landscape. It's a chilling reminder of what can happen when the personal becomes political, when a woman's voice is deemed too dangerous to be heard, and when the curtain is pulled back to reveal the dark machinery that runs beneath the Boulevard of Dreams. The stories of those who were silenced deserve to be told. To uncover more truths hidden in the shadows of Hollywood and beyond, subscribe to Boulevard_of_Monroe.